Dom DeLuise.
Of course it's an arcade, you meathead!
Jeff Bennett.
Hey, did one of you minxes call me a rag-clad bundle of straw?
Jim Cummings.
Oh! You doing, gents?
Tress McNeil.
Every bunny is good looking in their own special way.
April Winchell.
I'm Miss Fit. Welcome to the Costumerama.
Tim Goddamn Curry.
I don't have time for more news of rabbits.
Dan Homer Simpson.
Whoa! I mean, whoa!
And Christopher, whoa, wait a minute, Doc. Are you trying to tell me that my mother has got the hots for me, Lloyd? There are far too many other names to mention, but by God does this game ooze talent. You don't even have to know the names of these people. Even with a rudimentary knowledge of 90s cartoons, TV or film, you will consistently hear voices you recognise from 1,000 other places. This, ladies and gents, is the cast of ToonStruck. And this, ladies and gents, is the game's big draw. I specifically remember, in fact, my own fascination with this game, having exhausted a heavy handful of older point-and-click adventure games, almost exclusively produced by LucasArts or Sierra. They were, to me, the absolute kings of creating a point-and-click adventure game that could be equal parts funny, charming, difficult, and satisfying to fathom. Other games within the genre, for me, never quite hit the mark, either following storylines I didn't care about, or taking themselves incredibly seriously, or featuring puzzles that made me want to cave my own head in. By 1996, when ToonStruck was released, I was already well past my sell-by date on point-and-click games. I simply wasn't interested anymore, but seeing footage of this thing in action, and with a hefty in-store advertisement campaign at the time of release, it was constantly scratching away at the back of my mind. So, toward the end of the 90s, I ended up buying the game for a paltry £5, and for the first time in a long time, and actually never since, I dropped right back into really enjoying point-and-click adventure games for 6 to 10 hours. This past few months, I've been dealing with some anxiety and depression issues, and I just really wanted to revisit a game that stuck out vividly in my mind as something I loved. And ToonStruck, having been given away by GOG a year or two ago, was sat in my library staring back at me. It dawned on me, as the game was installing, that the last point-and-click adventure game I ever properly sat down to play was probably ToonStruck. The point-and-click genre didn't just fall out of favour with me in particular, it went through a fairly heavy slump throughout the PS2 and Xbox era, and it started to make a comeback during the indie boom, and thanks to companies like Telltale Games who revitalised the genre, and then refused to innovate on that idea and effectively shot themselves in the face. Point-and-click adventure games in their purest form are a strange beast. They can be frustrating, they can be slow, they can be needlessly obtuse, but in equal measures they can be exciting, they can be interesting, and they can provide that necessary dopamine hit of consistent success and progression. The issue is often centered around difficulty. Make a point-and-click adventure game too easy, and all but the most smooth-brained of us will likely be bored of the puzzle elements. There may be some excitement to be gained from the story, but really, if your puzzles are so easy that you can just breeze through, then just read a book or watch TV. There's no game there. Just do some word searches while watching Quincy. If your game is too difficult, then progression halts. The Police Quest and Space Quest games, as much as I loved them, were absolutely some of the most fist-bitingly annoying point-and-clickers out there. And honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that I didn't have the internet back then to distract me with something new and shiny, and I hadn't just bought the entire collection of these games, I probably would have given up with both of them. But I didn't, I persevered, and I didn't get very far, and then when I finally got the internet, I went and looked up a guide and I completed them all by cheating my way through. I literally waited for the invention of the internet in order to complete the Quest games. I'm either thick or a very patient genius. Did I enjoy the games by doing that? Well, yes and no. I didn't particularly enjoy the game elements because I wasn't really playing a game. I enjoyed the story. So, much like a point-and-click game that's too easy, making a point-and-click that's too hard will either halt people's progress and make them want to chew their own hands off, or they'll start looking for the solution and lose any of the dopamine rush they would have received if they'd worked it out themselves, which in some cases they never would have, because they're dumb. So the key is balance, and that balance comes with its own peaks and troughs throughout. Other genres of games are usually focused on continuously becoming more exciting or action-packed. Perhaps it'll see you unlocking new abilities or finding your skill improving, but point-and-click games aren't like that. Ignoring the story beats and focusing just on gameplay, these games will follow the same peaks and troughs from start to finish. Walk around, investigate, find items, get stuck on a puzzle, work out the solution. Walk around, investigate, find items, get stuck on a puzzle, find the solution. Up and down, consistently trying to ensure that these down parts never quite dip below the low bar of frustration. The reason I say all this up front is because this review will have spoilers going forward. If you're someone who wants to jump into ToonStruck without having any of the puzzles spoiled at all, I suggest you go away after this section and play it first, because the very nature of me showing footage of the game will reveal, either accidentally or in some cases on purpose, some of those answers. But I will say this. For me, gameplay-wise, ToonStruck often does a fantastic job of riding the balance between the lines of frustration. It'll often make you feel like a clever bugger for working something out that at first may seem off-kilter and nonsensical, but with your head in a cartoon world, using cartoon mechanics, you automatically think outside the box. That being said, they are not always so successful in their execution, and there are times during ToonStruck where you'll wander and wander and wander, trying your hardest to work out the answer to puzzles that you just don't have the solution to, because the item you need is hidden away in a cluster of pixels you just didn't think to click on. Before we get into it proper, let me say that ToonStruck is well worth playing, but it's a flawed gem, and by God did I want to kick its head in sometimes. You play as downtrodden cartoon animator Drew Blank. That's right, they went there. Drew Blank has been told that the Fluffy Fluffy Bun Bun show requires a shot in the arm, and that shot in the arm needs to come from
More bunnies.
Already overworked and underappreciated, Drew has to pull an all-nighter, but quite literally draws a blank. He wistfully recalls a character he once designed called Flux Wildly, who never got a shot at cartoon fame, when the inevitable happens. A thunderstorm strikes, but it doesn't do the usual thing where it strikes the building, and then a TV comes on, and then Drew gets sucked into the cartoon world. And oh boy, we've entered Who Framed Roger Rabbit territory. He quickly discovers that all is not well in the land of cartoons, and just as quickly meets up with Flux Wildly himself, although, as is pretty common in the game, he looks right through him with cold, dead eyes rather than, at him, because he's not really there. Sorry to break that magic spell for you. They meet the king, who explains that the world they inhabit is divided into 3 areas. Cutopia, inhabited by cute things. Zanydoo, Flux Wildly's home turf, where all the wacky characters live. And the Malevolands, where all the evil characters reside. From this place, the evil Nefarious has developed a flying malevolator which
Shoots a powerful ray that corrupts everything it touches, turning all that is sweet and pleasant into all that is sinister and ugly.
To combat this, with the help of the king's chief technician, you must find the required items to put together a cutifier to reverse Nefarious's corruption. This creates an overarching goal for your adventure and a giant puzzle in itself, rather than, say, collecting 12 magical gems or some other boring bollocks. You're tasked with trying to find items that are the direct opposite of what is used in the Malevolator. One item is already discovered for you, giving you a hint as to what you need to do. Spice replaces sugar. But it doesn't actually hint at just how devilish some of these opposites are. The opposite of salt, for instance, will no doubt be pepper, but it might not be the kind of pepper that you're thinking of. This sets the scene for your initial journey. Travel the land, solve puzzles, and ultimately get yourself a cutifier so you can finally put the cartoon world back to how it was. So let's take a look at those puzzles. This is where the crux of the review lies, but it's also where the vast majority of the spoilers are going to happen, because I'm going to take you through some of the solutions in order to explain a lot of my points. So please, last chance, if you really don't want any of this spoiled for you, back out now and forever hold your peace. For everyone else, let me take you back to that initial discussion around the peaks and troughs of point-and-click game design, and explain why this game often succeeds, but sometimes fails to nail that balance. Successes, first of all. The overarching goal of requiring specific items to build the cutifier is fantastic. You will notice items in the scene and immediately think, okay, I need that, but how do I get it? It's a great way to consistently guide your hand toward what you need to do. However, you also have to remind yourself that finding all of these items is the end goal. Your immediate goals will often revolve around conversations with each of the characters you meet, and the game does a good job of teaching you this straight away with bric-a-brac. There's only 2 characters you can talk to here. Bric-a-brac, who will tell you all about the cutifier and what your immediate goals are, and the footman, who's polishing some trophies.
Hello?
Hello. We're looking for the Royal Engineer.
Really? I'm looking for my glasses.
Oh.
Bric-a-brac has lost his glasses, and a search yields nothing. Speak to the footman about it, and he says,
I don't suppose he has checked his pockets.
Go back to Bric-a-brac, and you'll start to note this consistent ice cube icon that appears in all conversations, a beautifully simple way to denote breaking the ice, because yes, they went there as well. As you break the ice more and more, it melts down to a puddle and essentially tells you there's nothing more to be gained here. Any information you've mined from the characters that you can press them further on will be laid out with pictographs. Bric-a-brac's glasses aren't anywhere to be found because the absolute goon has them in his pocket. You learn this, and subsequently succeed at this puzzle, simply by talking. It teaches you that in order to get the solutions in this game, you're going to need to listen to a lot of cartoon world bants, for good or bad. So, with some sort of direction in hand, your next step up the puzzle solution evolution ladder is to work out just how to get the items you need, and these often rely on a chain reaction of puzzle solving to deal with. Take one of the first puzzles you can solve, for example. There are 2 items in the trophy room that you want to pick up. The fish, which isn't used until much later in the game, and the watering can, which is needed fairly early on. The footman, however, isn't letting you get away with things that easily, so you'll need to remove him. Firstly, you speak to the happy armadillos outside.
Boy, it sure has been a tough day. Hasn't it, Flux?
Yes?
Oh, we sure could use some cheering up.
Mayday, mayday! Our friends have the frownies. Quick, the dance.
Oh no, wait, it hasn't been that tough.
2, 3, 4. Bippity bip bip bippity ba. Bip boop bip boop bippity ba. Ya da 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 diddly.
Oh, looks like the little fellow's dropped something.
With key in hand, this allows you to access the room directly underneath the trophy room, the King's Chambers. Here you'll find a chest of drawers with a note attached. Align the drawers in a specific way as hinted at by the note, and a secret door will open. Roll back the mat that's on the floor and you can see there's a trap door. Pull the rope and the footman rushes in. Can you see where this is headed? Heading into the secret room, you'll discover a plank of wood on the floor that will surely act as a catapult, and this is where one of the game's most interesting and incredibly underused gimmicks comes in, Flux Wildly. You can direct him to do things by clicking on him, then clicking on what you want him to use. And when I say he's underused, I really mean that. I think this is one of maybe 3 times you do it in the entire game, but anyway, put Flux on there, catapult him up, put the rug back, pull the cord, and ta-da!
Huh? Huh? No.
Yes!
Whoops.
Oh dear. Ouch. Predictable. Huh? How inconvenient. That would do it.
The trophy room is finally yours, but the puzzle hasn't even ended here. Removing the watering can sets off a security system which stops you from leaving, and you'll need something to counterbalance that weight, but I'll leave that particular conundrum up to you, because by now I'm sure you can see just how intertwined all these progressions are. Puzzles don't just get solved, they consistently build on one another, and it's a genuine joy to piece these things together. For the most part, there's always something, one little strand of a solution within your grasp, and the game always tries to aim strictly for cartoon logic. The problems start to seep in when your exploration throughout this cartoon landscape begins to expand further and further, and the numerous strands you have dangling in the air are becoming harder and harder to grasp, particularly when you've missed a specific item. Let's go back to the king's bedroom for a second, shall we? The king's bedroom had all of this puzzle solving and items to deal with that I completely neglected to search further. On my head be it, I should have known to check every single pixel on a screen, but no. I missed something that may seem obvious to you, because I'm specifically pointing it out, but to me, the bedroom had been written off. I was done with it. No gold left to mine. So later in the game, I was completely and utterly stuck. A specific quest line just didn't seem to want to budge, and I had absolutely no idea what to do. Wandering, endless wandering for ages and ages, before eventually I stumbled back into the room in a bored, frustrated stupor, and I finally clicked on the ladder. It turns out Drew can't get up there, but Flux can, and hidden beneath the king's pillow is an item that basically unlocked every next step I needed to take. And even though I knew I needed this specific item, there was no logical way for me to know where it was. No hint or clue that the king would own it, and for whatever reason, hide it under his pillow. It required nothing more than clicking in the right place at the right time. It's vital to know going into a game like this that the frustration dip you feel will often be one of two things, and this can be true of any point and click game, and it could be why I started to bounce off them more and more as I got older. If you're running around in circles, one of two things is wrong. Either you've missed an item that you need, or you're not thinking the correct way about a puzzle. My issue with not just ToonStruck, but often the genre as a whole, is that there's no way to determine which of these two things I'm missing. And as the game expands, as there are more screens to explore, more threads and strands and potentials, the frustration in not knowing which element is missing can and will lead people to walk away from a game unless they're completely invested. I didn't, though. I persevered through to the end, and by the time I got to the game's second disc, some of the puzzles had me absolutely tearing my hair out. In certain cases, I beat them by accident. In other cases, by using everything on everything. It was in these moments, the low moments of ToonStruck, when completing a puzzle felt like throwing shit at a wall to see if it opened a magic door, that I remembered why I rarely play these games anymore. Because I'm thick. ToonStruck takes inspiration from a ton of 90s cartoons, not least in its voice cast and the characters they put their vocals to. From a bodybuilding bulldog,
to my surprising, your little monkey head actually contains a tiny brain,
to a disgruntled security guard.
In short, from where you stand, I am the law. As such, I am authorized to deal with scoundrels, gangsters, charlatans, miscreants, rapscallions, ne'er-do-wells, and all other troublemakers as I see fit.
To a ditzy costume store owner who's also a genius that loves reading books.
Good book?
Not even. I am like a total agnostic.
No, I meant, do you like your book? Like?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's no such thing as a bad book, you know.
To an octopus grifter who runs the local arcade.
So, is this an arcade?
No, it's a flower shop. Only we're fresh out of flowers.
Seeing which new character is just around the corner is one of ToonStruck's strongest pulls, and it's a shame that not all of the writing is quite up to scratch. There is a consistent need at the heart of ToonStruck to make every single line of dialogue funny, and for the most part it circles the orbit of Dad Joke Planet. Through the entire game, I didn't let out a single chortle, merely a smirk here and there. Although no, I tell a lie, there is one thing that made me laugh when I first played it as a teenager, but we'll come back to that. If I didn't know it was already coming up, I probably would have laughed again because it's bizarre, but we'll come back to it. If this sounds overly harsh, it's not. It's a mild criticism. At no point did the game's lack of making me laugh ever really push me away from it. The characters are, for the most part, charming in their own way, and some of them I outright loved.
Hi there, guys.
He's Warp, I'm Woof. Welcome to Whack Me.
Although others are just annoying.
After I made my dough, Ray would cook it into nice rolls and sell those in his shop.
The day after, Ray would pass the leftover rolls on to me, and I'd sell them at my place.
But now that our dear brother is gone,
those dough is left uncooked.
Can't win them all though, and it's good to see that the vast majority of these characters are interesting because, as mentioned earlier, most of the puzzle solving you'll need to do in the game revolves around each and every one of these guys. That break the ice button can last 3 or 4 goes before you've exhausted it, and then you'll have all of the separate bits of information to look at. In a lesser game, this would be exhausting and boring. While it's not belly laugh central, it's light in tone and it doesn't insist on wasting your time with too much pointless babbling. And if you really, really love dad jokes, well, fuck me, sunshine, why don't you just go ahead and marry them? One of the big selling points for ToonStruck, as well as the cast, was the smooth animation. And I've got to be honest with you, it ain't that smooth. It's passable. Some characters, however, don't seem to align at all with what they're supposed to be doing. This scene, for instance, where Christopher Lloyd refuses to even face the right way while he's talking. This character sneezes, but it happens out of sync with the animation.
I'll take something big, and I'll... Excuse me.
I'm not sure if this is a quirk of running the game on modern machines, or the game was always like this, but the animation is fine. Don't expect fluid motion, put it that way. For the static backgrounds, they've definitely done their due, and whether you enjoy them or not is going to really hinge on your enjoyment of 90s cartoon aesthetic. Warped scenery, lush colours, out of proportion, well, everything. The world of ToonStruck is vibrant and fits perfectly well with the theme it's aiming for. One of my favourite elements of this, in fact, and this wraps us back around to my one true laugh within the game, as you make progress, the world begins to transform. There's this barn you come across fairly early on that houses a knackered old horse, a friendly cow, and a sheep. Drew and Flux are absolute dicks to them because they can't help but crack dad jokes every 3 seconds. But this is Qtopia, and everyone is lovely and friendly. The cow just wants to get a butter machine working. This is a happy place. Until about 30 to 40% of the way through the game, when the Malevolator descends and shoots the landscape, turning it from an idyllic barn on a hillside into an S&M dungeon. I shit you not.
Give it to me!
The way this removes an area full of puzzles that you've solved and turns it into a completely new one is ingenious, and much like the use of Flux Wildly, it's bafflingly underused. It's a fantastic way of signalling to the player that this area is now done with. You don't need to go back there anymore, so here's something new. But it doesn't really happen again. And it's a shame because I would love to see this cutified world become progressively more sinister. I want to see the arcade filled with Mortal Kombat rip-offs. I want to see the Armadillo Guard's happy dance turn into a swirling mosh pit. Alas, it doesn't happen. ToonStruck plays a pretty sweet trick, and it's not one I'm going to fully spoil here, but it's got something in it that caught me off guard when I first played it all those years ago. It probably would have had more of an impact, however, if the game didn't come on 2 discs, because I was constantly thinking, well, what's the second disc for? I've nearly completed the game. Once you finally build the cutifier, things take a left turn, and after a series of events, you end up captured by Nefarious himself and have to plan your escape. This section of the game is where the puzzles start to really ramp up their what the hell am I supposed to do factor. This air vent, for instance, provides no obvious clue as to what to do, but wait a minute, are those spiders? That must be a clue that I have to put on a fly costume and climb the walls. Yep, see, it's a little off the mark in places, but it's doable. It's doable. Smashing itself off that frustration line like a bouncy ball, but doable. In terms of an ending, well, it's not the most satisfying thing in the world. It's sequel bait for a sequel that was eventually canned because ToonStruck didn't meet the sales targets they'd hoped for. If the ending was an emotion, it would be a light shrug. It's over. You've completed it. Move on. The story sets itself up as a metaphor for dealing with creative drought, but ultimately fails to tie that up in any meaningful way. The idea is tenuous at best, even partway through the adventure. It starts off as a fairly crystallized and obvious idea, and by the end it devolves into a generic adventure story with a cliffhanger-ish ending. That may well have come to fruition in the sequel, but I kind of doubt it. On release, ToonStruck received mostly glowing reviews, with a couple of middling to scathing reviews, the latter of which criticised the writing, the lack of any real laughs, the poor animation, the puzzle solutions, the soundtrack, basically everything. On the flip side, ToonStruck was named PC Gamer's 37th best computer game ever made. It was a finalist in CGW's Adventure Game of the Year award at the time, and it got other nominations from other places. Personally, I think there's a lot to like in ToonStruck. It doesn't always succeed at leading the player down the correct path to progress, but it doesn't hold your hand and skip through a field of solutions either. When you're not actively making progress, there's usually always something that you want to check out or explore or talk to in order to get the ball rolling on the next strand of a puzzle. And when there isn't that, well, you've probably missed something obvious. It just won't be obvious until you find it. To alleviate the inevitable wandering between screens, the game thankfully allows you to bypass Drew's slow walking animation with a right click of the mouse, although it does mean that one particular item you find later on is weirdly practically useless. You find a safe with a box sliding puzzle, which everyone loves, don't lie, and on completion you find a hole. This hole can be put into one of 3 manhole slots in the world, which allows you to fast travel to any of the 3. The problem is, using the hole usually results in some form of dialogue and animation, then you get transported to this hub world place, then you get the animation of them popping out the other side. It saves you maybe 5 to 10 seconds of time. It's barely worth it, honestly, especially as you need to be in specific places to use it. Another thing that initially seems like a cool idea but doesn't really amount to anything, Nefarious's henchmen. At a later point in the game, these guys will be hunting for you, and it seems like a nice change of pace to have to suddenly be on the run from something. But they only ever appear when you enter specific buildings, and the solution to hide from them is exactly the same in every building. You get the cutscene of the henchmen appearing. You hide in a cupboard.
Move it! They can't have gotten far!
They leave. A different set of solutions for each circumstance would definitely have made this idea more interesting. A little timed resolution window for you to quickly throw a plan together lest you get thrown in jail. Because that is one good thing about ToonStruck, there is no death here. Consequences usually result in you being thrown into a jail cell, providing you with a puzzle section to escape. There's no loss of progress, which would no doubt have just sapped the patience right out of me. So, ToonStruck, it's a mixed bag, but overall it still comes out as one that is genuinely fun to persevere with. Come for the wacky goofball humour and amazing voice cast, stay for the genuinely interesting puzzles and sadly often underutilized concepts. It's a game that does so many things right that it doesn't build on, but it also does a lot of things wrong that it equally doesn't build on. So what you're left with is a game that is tantalizingly close to being up there with the best of them, but it harbours this weird space between being really bloody good and really bloody frustrating. Is it worth playing now? Yes, completely and utterly, especially if you're a fan of point-and-click games in general, which, as discussed, I'm not in particular, but even for those of you who, like me, haven't gone back to them for a while, give it a try. ToonStruck may very well surprise you. For all its peaks and all its troughs, it still manages to come out the other side as a solid piece of entertainment.